The Republic Summary. Plato's vision of justice, the ideal state, and the philosopher king. Introduction. A timeless inquiry into justice. Welcome to this audio summary of Plato's The Republic. Before we dive into one of Western philosophy's most influential works, I want to be clear about what you're experiencing. This is an audio-focused presentation without flashy visuals, animations, or distracting effects. What we're doing here is something increasingly rare in our modern world. We're asking you to focus deeply and engage with complex ideas that have shaped political thought for over 2 millennia. In an age where our attention is constantly fragmented by notifications and social media, the ability to sit with difficult ideas and follow extended arguments is becoming a rare and valuable skill. So, I invite you to eliminate distractions, settle in, and give this your complete attention. The insights we'll explore today about justice, the soul, education, and the ideal society reward that kind of focused listening. The Republic is Plato's masterwork, written around 380 BCE as a dramatic dialogue. The conversation takes place at the home of Cephalus in Piraeus, near Athens. Socrates, Plato's mentor and the dialogue's central figure, engages with various interlocutors in an extended discussion that begins with a simple question. What is justice? This seemingly straightforward question unfolds into an ambitious exploration that constructs an entire ideal city-state, examines the nature of the human soul, critiques art and poetry, and culminates in a vision of philosopher-rulers who possess both wisdom and political power. The influence of the Republic cannot be overstated. It established the foundations for political philosophy, proposed radical ideas about education and gender equality, and introduced the famous allegory of the cave. Whether one agrees with Plato's conclusions or finds them troubling, the Republic remains essential reading for anyone interested in justice, governance, or how we should live together in society. Defining justice, from simple definitions to radical challenge. The dialogue begins with Socrates visiting Cephalus, an elderly, wealthy merchant. When Cephalus suggests that justice simply means telling the truth and paying one's debts, Socrates immediately finds counterexamples. If a friend lends you weapons and then goes mad, should you return them? Obviously not. So justice must be more complex. Polemarchus takes up the argument, suggesting that justice means helping friends and harming enemies. But Socrates dismantles this definition too. How do we know who our true friends are? And if justice makes us better, how could it involve harming anyone, since harm makes people worse? Then the sophist Thrasymachus bursts into the conversation with barely contained aggression. Justice, he declares, is nothing more than the advantage of the stronger. Rulers make laws that benefit themselves, and they call obedience justice. In reality, justice is for suckers. The smart person seeks their own advantage. The tyrant who can do whatever he wants is happier than the just person who constrains himself with moral rules. This cynical view represents a genuine challenge. Why should we be just if injustice brings more benefits? Socrates needs to demonstrate that justice isn't merely useful as a social convention, but is intrinsically valuable. That the just person is happier than the unjust person, regardless of external rewards or punishments. To answer this question, Socrates proposes an innovative method. Since justice in the individual soul might be difficult to perceive, he suggests constructing an ideal city-state in speech. Justice in the city, being written larger, should be easier to see. Once they understand justice in the state, they can look for the same pattern in the individual soul. Building the ideal city. Classes, education, and radical proposals. Socrates begins constructing his ideal city from first principles. Cities arise because individuals are not self-sufficient. We need shelter, food, clothing, and numerous other goods. Specialization increases productivity. The person who focuses entirely on farming produces more food than someone who divides their time between multiple tasks. As the city grows more complex, it needs merchants to facilitate trade, a military class to defend against external threats, and rulers to govern wisely. Here, Socrates introduces one of the dialogue's most controversial elements: the division of society into three distinct classes. The guardian class, a warrior elite, will defend the city and eventually produce its rulers. These guardians must be carefully selected and rigorously educated. They need the seemingly contradictory qualities of fierceness toward enemies and gentleness toward fellow citizens. The education of the guardians occupies extensive discussion. They'll study music, poetry, and gymnastics, but not just any poetry. Socrates proposes strict censorship of stories told to children. Traditional myths that depict gods behaving immorally must be banned. The guardians must learn that the divine is good and unchanging, that death is not to be feared excessively, and that self-control and courage are supremely valuable. This censorship troubles many modern readers, but Plato's reasoning reveals concerns about moral formation that remain relevant. If we expose impressionable young people to stories celebrating vice or cruelty, how can we expect them to develop virtue? The question of what cultural materials shape character remains contentious today. The guardian class will live communally, without private property. They'll own no gold or silver, share common meals, and, most radically, practice the communal rearing of children. Parents won't know which children are theirs. Plato believed private families created divided loyalties that undermined commitment to the common good. Even more surprising, Plato argues that women capable of being guardians should receive the same education and responsibilities as men. While he claims women are generally weaker, he insists that individual women with natural talents for guardianship should be trained accordingly. This proto-feminist position was extraordinarily radical for ancient Athens, where women had virtually no public role. The third class comprises farmers, craftspeople, and merchants, everyone who provides the material foundation for society. They can own private property, maintain family units, and live conventional lives. The tripartite soul, and justice as internal harmony. Having constructed his ideal city with three classes, Socrates identifies three corresponding parts of the human soul. The rational part seeks truth and wisdom. The spirited part craves honor, victory, and recognition. The appetitive part desires physical pleasures, food, sex, and wealth. Justice in the city meant each class performing its proper function without interfering with others. Similarly, justice in the individual means each part of the soul performing its proper role under the governance of reason. The rational part should rule, the spirited part should support reason's decisions, and the appetitive part should be controlled rather than allowed to dominate. This psychological model explains both virtue and vice. Courage comes from the spirited part, properly trained to fear only what reason says should be feared. Temperance involves all parts of the soul agreeing about which part should rule. Wisdom resides in the rational part's knowledge of what's genuinely good. And justice is the harmony achieved when each part performs its function. The tyrant represents the opposite of this healthy psychic order. Dominated by lawless appetites, particularly the hunger for power, the tyrant's soul is enslaved to the most unstable and unsatisfiable part of human nature. Far from being maximally free and happy, as Thrasymachus suggested, the tyrant is maximally enslaved, constantly afraid, unable to trust anyone, tortured by desires that can never be fully satisfied. To explain what the rational part should pursue, Socrates introduces his theory of forms. Beyond the physical world of changing, imperfect objects lies a realm of eternal, perfect forms. Beauty itself, justice itself, the good itself. Physical objects are merely imperfect copies of these perfect forms. The form of the good stands at the apex of this hierarchy, illuminating all other forms the way the sun illuminates physical objects. Just as the sun makes seeing possible and proportions to grow, the good makes knowledge possible and gives being to other forms. The philosopher who grasps the form of the good understands the ultimate foundation of reality and value. The allegory of the cave, from darkness to enlightenment. To illustrate the journey from ignorance to philosophical understanding, Socrates presents his allegory of the cave, perhaps the most famous metaphor in Western philosophy. Imagine prisoners chained in a cave since childhood, facing a wall. Behind them burns a fire, and between the fire and the prisoners, people carry objects that cast shadows on the wall. The prisoners see only these shadows and mistake them for reality. If one prisoner were freed and forced to turn toward the fire, the light would hurt his eyes. If dragged up a steep path out of the cave into sunlight, he'd be even more pained and blinded. Gradually, his eyes would adjust. He'd first see shadows and reflections, then objects themselves, eventually the stars and moon, and finally, the sun itself, the source of all light and life. Understanding that the sun makes everything visible and causes the seasons and growth, he'd recognize it as the cause of everything he'd seen before. If this enlightened prisoner returned to the cave to free the others, his eyes would need time to readjust to darkness. The other prisoners, seeing him stumble, would conclude that the journey upward had ruined his vision. They might even kill anyone who tried to free them. The allegory operates on multiple levels. The cave represents the physical world of changing appearances. The journey upward represents philosophical education, the ascent from opinion to knowledge. The sun represents the form of the good. The freed prisoner who returns represents the philosopher who, having glimpsed truth, must return to govern the city, despite preferring to remain in contemplation. This allegory reveals why philosopher rulers are necessary and why they'll be reluctant rulers. Only those who understand the forms, particularly the good, possess the knowledge required for wise governance. But having seen ultimate truth, they'll naturally prefer philosophical contemplation to political engagement. They must be compelled to rule by duty, not ambition, which is precisely why they'll rule well. Those who lust for power are least suited to wield it. Poetry, art, and the soul's immortality. In a section that has troubled readers for centuries, Socrates argues that poetry and representative art should be largely banned from the ideal city. His reasoning stems from his metaphysics. Physical objects are copies of forms, and artistic representations are copies of copies, 3 steps removed from reality. Poetry is even more dangerous because it appeals to the emotional rather than rational part of the soul. Tragic poetry, depicting noble characters suffering and lamenting, encourages us to indulge emotions that we should control in our own lives. Only poetry that celebrates virtue and praises the gods should be permitted. Modern readers often find this censorship tyrannical. How could Plato propose banning Homer? Yet, his concerns about art's formative influence on character remain debated today, even if we reject his authoritarian conclusions. The dialogue concludes with the myth of air, a story about the afterlife, suggesting that souls are immortal and that our choices in this life determine our fate in the next. This mythological ending reminds us that Plato uses multiple modes of discourse, rigorous argument, extended metaphor, and mythic narrative, to explore truths that transcend purely logical demonstration. We're almost through the summary, only the conclusion remains. If you found this exploration of Plato's Republic valuable, I'd genuinely appreciate if you'd take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. These simple actions help others discover this content and support the creation of more deep dives into foundational philosophical works. I encourage you to explore the other videos on this channel, where we examine influential texts across philosophy, political theory, and intellectual history. And if this particular journey through the Republic has sparked your curiosity, I strongly recommend reading Plato's original dialogue. There's a link in the description below. The actual text contains dramatic nuances, additional arguments, and layers of irony that no summary can fully capture. Additionally, if you enjoy experiencing books through audio, consider trying Audible, where you can access excellent narrations of the Republic and countless other philosophical classics. There's a link for that in the description as well. Conclusion: the Republic's enduring legacy. More than 2,000 years after its composition, the Republic remains simultaneously inspiring and troubling, visionary and disturbing. Its influence on Western political philosophy, educational theory, and ethics cannot be overstated. Yet many of its proposals, from strict censorship to the abolition of the family among guardians to rule by a philosophical elite, strike modern democratic sensibilities as authoritarian and impractical. Perhaps the dialogue's greatest value lies not in its specific political proposals, but in its fundamental questions and conceptual frameworks. What is justice, and why should we care about it? What constitutes a good society, and what kind of education produces good citizens? How should reason relate to emotion and desire in a well-ordered soul? What is the relationship between knowledge and political power? Plato's answer, that justice is internal harmony, that the ideal state mirrors the structure of the ideal soul, and that true knowledge justifies political authority, may not convince us, but his insistence that these questions matter, that political arrangements should be grounded in understanding human nature and the good, remains profoundly relevant. The Republic also established the method of political philosophy, using reason to critically examine existing arrangements, constructing ideal models to clarify principles, and evaluating actual states against these ideals. Every subsequent political philosopher works in the shadow of the Republic. The tension between expertise and democracy that animates contemporary politics echoes the dialogue's central question. Should political power rest with the knowledgeable few or the many? Plato's answer challenges democratic assumptions while raising legitimate concerns about uninformed decision-making. Similarly, his vision of education aimed at forming virtuous character, rather than merely transmitting information, remains relevant. In debates about curriculum and educational purpose, we're still wrestling with questions Plato raised. What should we teach? How does education shape who people become? For anyone interested in political philosophy, ethics, or the perennial questions of how we should live and organize our societies, the Republic remains essential. It offers not easy answers, but profound questions. Not a blueprint to implement, but a vision to inspire reflection. And in demonstrating how philosophical inquiry can illuminate practical questions about justice and governance, it established a tradition of thought that continues to shape how we understand ourselves and our communities. That's it. Thanks for listening. I hope you found this summary fun to listen to and valuable.